Hi everyone, my name is Emily and I'm the Young Adult Librarian at the Rock Island Public Library. And today I have two books for you through Hoopla, that is the app we're going to be covering today. As always, Hoopla titles are great because even if someone else has something checked out, you can check it out also at the same time. There's not like a limit on the number of copies. As long as we haven't hit our daily borrowing limit, you can still check out. And I will say there are some manga that have been added to Hoopla recently that, I'm going to try and check some out. It's not a big selection. It seems to be all kind of Tokyo pop, and it's not a big selection, but there's more than there used to be, so that made me happy. And today, I mentioned manga. I do have two graphic novels for you. And this first one is Redbone, the true story of a Native American rock band. And we're almost at the end of Native American History Month, but I wanted to bring this because I started it and really enjoyed reading it. I don't know when I started this book exactly. I think my weird reading theme for 2022, because this book I believe came out in 2020. I looked at the publication date, and the theme for my reading life this year is finishing books that were published in 2020 that I started once and then did not get back to until this year, which, is reflective of the last 2 years of being alive. So in this book, we are introduced to Pat Vegas first. We meet him at the start here. He is having lunch with his family. He's with his wife and daughter and son. And, the way it's set up is sort of like each chapter, it's Redbone Comics. It comes up at the top. And so we meet Pat and Lolly Vegas, and they, in 1962, kind of started to play music professionally. They'd been playing for a while, but in the 60s, they were starting to get big. Yeah, 1960 to 1968 was the time when they were really growing their careers and playing with a lot of pretty well-known names. They were starting to be in backing bands, or, they were session musicians, and this is how they met people, like, for example, Jim Morrison, that he is. And then later on, Jimi Hendrix. And this is, Jimi Hendrix was actually, in this book we find, he's the person who, they're out one night, after playing. They joined Jimi Hendrix on stage for an out-of-this-world jam. And then it's like later that night, thanks dudes, that was a blast. My grandma's Cherokee. And one of the Vegas brothers says, why'd you say that? Is it so obvious we're Indians? And Jimi Hendrix says, not hard to tell. Only white people would think you're Mexican. And they talked about, not easy being black or Indian in this country. We lucked out doing something we love. Not everyone can say the same. And Jimi Hendrix says, besides, let me tell you something. There ought to be an all-Indian band. That'd make this country sit up. And, later Jimmy became Jimmy. He remained a big fan of Lolly's guitar stylings. But that wasn't the year we formed the group. The idea stuck with us, and as Redbone, we ran into Jimmy again in 70 on the Isle of Wight, a few days before he died. And here, Jimi Hendrix is saying, Redbone wouldn't be a bad name for an Indian band. So, in future chapters, this is chapter 2, so 1968, this is when the Vegas brothers met Tony Bellamy. And then 1969, okay, this is when they met Pete DePoe. And so these are the founding members of the group you see on the cover. And in terms of getting together as a group and playing music, it's, we learn about their individual histories, how they came to music, but also Native Americans at the time, and how, as the African American civil rights movement was growing, so was, by the end of the 1960s, a Native American civil rights movement. And here we get just a brief history of residential schools in, the 19th century, following massacres at Wounded Knee, Sand Creek, others like that. And then, these residential schools, like the horrors of those places are really just becoming well known to people who aren't Native American. In the US and Canada, these places existed when, it was genocide. It was cultural genocide, certainly. But also the idea was to kill the Indian, save the man. That was a famous quote from one of the founders of these schools. And, yeah, this was, Captain Richard Henry Pratt. And that was, he ordered the first state-sponsored school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So, in reflecting on this, Pat Vegas gets to the founding of Redbone, and how, after playing music for a while and kind of developing their sound together, the group, they got together, they started to just play songs, and then, played for a record executive. And the name Redbone is Cajun slang for a mixed race person with some Indian blood. That's where the name comes from. So, in recording music and starting to get out there, 1970, this is about AIM, which was a Native American group. This is, here we go, flip this back. So basically this was a group that started to protest the fact that, Native Americans, the American Indian movement was born. And basically in the 60s, cops would raid bars in the Indian neighborhood of Minneapolis and arrest any natives who'd had too much. Always Indians, never white people. Naturally, the arrests were violent. So back then, 1% of Minnesota's population was Native American, but in jail, 1 out of every 3 prisoners was Indian. And, the founders of AIM, Dennis Banks, who'd been picked up by the police several times, and Clyde Belcourt, who became an activist after spending several years in prison, decided to do something. So it gets into the fact that for, Redbone, it was important to them to be part of this movement, to support this movement. In fact, I think their first, the proceeds from their first couple albums, as they were doing well and starting to find success, they gave a lot of money to AIM. They really wanted to support their efforts. And so, by 1971, they were playing and they were traveling all over. And, Redbone did really well in the U.S., but even more so in Europe. In fact, the creator of this graphic novel, Christian Stabler, is French. And I believe, he met while forming, making a website for Redbone, kind of collecting their discography and just kind of trying to build knowledge of them online. And you can see in the back here is a discography at the very end. But there's a funny story of Pat Vegas, they played just before the Queen of England, because they had earned a platinum record. And somebody comes, after the show, bravo, what a powerful concert. And it's a woman, and Pat just says, thanks, babe. And then he turns around, and it's the Queen of England. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And it's quite all right, young man. So they just, they have these stories about, the songs they wrote, Wovoka. This was, kind of one of their big hits. But Come and Get Your Love, this was just a song that modern people, many of us, we didn't know about until the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie in 2014. So it's interesting how this book moves around in time, because Chapter 7 is all about Wounded Knee and the protest that took place there, and how this is a song you could hear online. It's actually, I brought in Redbone, Come and Get Your Redbone, the best of Redbone, but We Were All Wounded at Wounded Knee is not actually on here. You can look it up on YouTube pretty easily. But basically, in 1973, this protest was, it was meant to protest corruption. And the idea was Dick Wilson was tribal president at Pine Ridge. And instead of fighting poverty, he embezzled money for his own gain. He ran the show in the res and made life hard for everyone. Bribes, selling off tribal lands to mining companies. He had his own private militia. And this all came to a head in 1973, when a lot of people, they decided on the night of February 27th, 1973, 200 Oglalas, the Oglala Sioux, AIM members and their supporters from all over showed up in cars, on foot, and on horseback at this site of Indian oppression, Wounded Knee. Soon police forces surrounded the village, arrayed against a few Indians with old rifles. The FBI seemed to be behind the whole thing, with Wilson's help. The goal, to take out AIM's leaders. Now, the siege lasted 71 days. That's right, 71. Bullets flew day and night. At least 130,000 shots were fired. Madness. A soldier was wounded on day 1. And, at this point, Pat Vegas' daughter, she asks, why did it drag out so long? And he says, because AIM had managed to draw in the press, and they did their job, so the whole world knew about what was going on. Under such conditions, the feds couldn't barge in. First negotiations with the government official began at last on March 13th. And so it gets into the idea of, at this time, just Native American activists really fighting for their rights and protesting unfair treatment. And how, as hard as this was, it was this movement that had been growing since the 60s, and this famous incident in 1973. It ends with Wilson, and he took back control of the village and Pine Ridge Reservation. In the years that followed, more than 50 of his opponents disappeared, and he never had any more troubles. Like, the siege ended May 8th, 1973. The occupiers scattered in the night, right under the noses of the FBI and Wilson's goons. And Pat Vegas' son is like, that's so depressing. Like, what was it for then? And Pat's thing is, it was about being proud to be Native, about courage. I mean, this was a national movement. It gained worldwide attention. Like, this was big for people because it wasn't just the story of, oh, Native Americans, they all died out in the 19th century. No, I mean, we're still here, we're still alive, we're still fighting for our rights. So it's a really interesting book, and by the end, it covers the end of Redbone, like by 1976. Certainly you could argue that we were all wounded at Wounded Knee. This was, something that in the United States, it was banned on some radio stations, and overseas it became a big hit. But, I mean, they were asked, like, oh, at one venue in the U.S., don't play that song. If you do, I'll cancel you guys right here and now. They're like, okay. And they just, all right, fine, sure, and then they start playing it. So, also, I mean, there were differences between the Vegas brothers. I think Lolly never gave Pat credit on Come and Get Your Love, which was their biggest hit, and so this caused a lot of friction between the brothers. But it also gets into them, after Redbone and in their later lives. And at the very end, goes back to, their childhood. Like the Vegas brothers learning, playing music and just getting into this for the first time. How, their grandfather taught them, like, what it means to work. And he's like, now that you know what work means, you can learn the guitar. So I will just say, if you're interested in this graphic novel, I would also check out the CD, which this was my mom's, but I think we've got this in the system. And Come and Get Your Love is the first song, obviously, but then you've got just really well-known classics by Redbone that, again, maybe you're not really familiar with this group and you weren't before, but you can check them out now. If you're a younger person like me, maybe you just, you don't know every great band from the 70s that has maybe become just kind of like achieved cult status over time. So we've got the Witch Queen of New Orleans, Maggie, Wovoka, Poison Ivy, Clouds in My Sunshine I really liked. And yeah, you can check out, there's 20 tracks on here, and I really enjoyed listening to this as I was traveling this weekend. So check it out, and check out the graphic novel. Also this week, I bring you Giant Days. And this is a book by John Allison. He's written a lot of webcomics. We've got, let's see, the other one, Bad Machinery is his main series that he illustrates. But this one, it's illustrated by, I think, let's see, I know later on, it's Lisa Tremaine for the first part of the series, and then it's Max Sarin later on. And this ran for several years. There were, 12 or 14 volumes, and this is volume 1. And in this book, we meet 3 friends. Their names are Susan, Esther, and Daisy. And see them on the back. Well, here's Esther on the front. There she is. And this is Daisy, and then that's Esther in the middle, and Susan's here. And they are living in England. They are all university students. They just started at university 3 weeks ago. Now they are good friends. And this is about their lives as college students. Like, it follows them from the beginning of university until when they graduate. So it's an interesting story about a time of life. Like, there's more and more now new adult books. Obviously, young adult as a genre has certainly grown in recent years, but new adult, this is just characters who are older teens, who are legally adults, and are kind of dealing with that time in your life where you're struggling because you're figuring out who you are, and maybe you're on your own for your first time, living away from your parents, and it's just, okay, you have the challenges of being in school and trying to maybe also balance a job and relationships, and you're figuring out, okay, like how being an adult works. And it's everything from, okay, what happens when one person spreads germs around your dorm, and 3 days later you feel like you're on death's door from the flu. Or in this case, like Esther at one point is, oh no, it's meningitis. It's probably meningitis. I've got to go to the doctor. And I mean, it's probably not that. In this case, it's not. It's flu. Get there's a vaccine for meningitis, so get that. Now, as this book goes on, I mean, just different things happen. Like Esther, she makes sure that they celebrate Daisy's 18th birthday. And Daisy is somebody who's never dated before. So being away from home, she's grown up living with her grandma. And now, for the first time, she's kind of starting to meet people, girls who she thinks, oh, maybe I'd like to date this person. I'm not sure. So it's also, it's this main cast of four. This is their friend Ed. Ed's in a lot of these. And as the series goes on, it's just these four trying to figure out, because Ed, he kind of it does not start out as a main character, but I feel like as the series goes on, achieves main character status. So, and then here we go. We've also got McGraw. Here's McGraw. He's one of those college students. This is a fact with college too. Like there's people in college who look like, they could be in junior high or high school perhaps. They still look very young. And then you have college students who look like they've been adults for a long time, even though they're like just 18 or 19 years old. So it's a fun series. I really enjoy the art, and you get to know the characters and their lives as they just spend these strange years of their lives together, and kind of get to figuring out, like, all right, well, after these three, like, they live in the dorm for the first year, but then they rent a house together after that. And it's just the three of them kind of figuring out dating and also being good friends and trying to figure out, okay, what does life after college look like? Because that's such a big part of college. Like, while you're there, you also have to think about the next step, or you spend a lot of time thinking, okay, well, this is now, and I want to enjoy the present, but I also got to plan for the future. And Daisy, she, I believe, is an archaeologist, or is in like studying anthropology, archaeology. And Esther, she is an English major. And Susan is a medical student, so she is going to be, like, even after the other two graduate, Susan's still got time in school. So it's the three of them being friends, and, even as their lives change and they're kind of going in different directions, it's the three of them figuring out, like, well, how do we want to decide, are we going to keep this friendship up? Because I was talking with my stepsister yesterday, and it's like, okay, who do we still keep in touch with from high school? Like, I have a couple friends that I tried to keep in touch with from college, but it's like, you kind of have to decide, like, how am I going to prioritize relations when you're not seeing these people every day anymore? Like, at the start of this book, it's like, hey, I'm living in the same building as these people, and I'm seeing them all the time, so of course we're good friends. But, I mean, when you're not present with people all the time, when you can decide, or, you have to choose to spend time with people, then it becomes different. That becomes, you get a very different friendship dynamic going. So, yeah, if you like humor, but like slice of life and realistic fiction, this is a really fun series. So check it out. And there's also a novel. I believe, like, all the books are on Hoopla. I don't think the novel is, but all the graphic novels are. And they just did a Kickstarter, which is like, it was the full library of books, because some have been out of print. And you can go, if you check this out, like if you search Giant Days on Kickstarter, you will see that there's still, if you want to pay $5, you can do that. And a copy of one of the Giant Days books, like library editions, will be donated to a library. So that's pretty cool. And again, both of these are available on Hoopla. You can check them out right now. And it is the 29th of the month, so that means if you have borrows left, use up your borrows. You get 15 a month. I actually used up mine, all of them, this month, which is rare. But it's the end of the month, so I'm kind of just checking out some books that I want to see what they're about. Get kind of a sense of, do I want to read this or not? But yeah, these are great. I enjoyed both of these. And one other quick note, I will say, if you want to see the movie Glass Onion, tonight is your last night to see it in a theater. Like, it's going to be on Netflix on December 23rd, but I really want to see it in a theater. So even though I'm tired from my 3 book talks today, I'm going to go. I'm going to stay caffeinated and make this happen. So thank you for watching. I will see you again next week.